Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like it's just one bombshell after another, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
This message comes from Jackson. Taxes aren't something you can only think about once a year. With investments, planning for tax day is year-round. Fortunately, Jackson offers tax-efficient products. Visit jackson.com for more information on how our products can make your tax bill a little bit less painful. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Psych Legal Pop podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about popular culture through the lens of an attorney and a therapist. I'm Brooke Brigham, I'm the attorney.
And I'm Tess Brigham, I'm the therapist.
And today we are going to be talking about the documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. And this is a film, it's on Netflix, and it was produced by the Obamas production company. And was it 20?
It was 2020. So
2020, yeah.
Yeah, it was released in, I guess it went to Sundance, and then I guess it was the Tribeca, if I'm remembering this right, film festival. And
yeah, it won the Sundance.
And there was all this big talk about it, but it was released mid-March 2020. So obviously got no love, and everyone's like, Tiger King. Not this. I can handle Tiger King at that moment. And so when we were looking for documentaries, I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this existed because of when it came out. And I actually found a lot of documentaries that came out in 2020 that sound really interesting that you didn't hear about because of everything that was going on. So,
yeah. Well, I remember hearing about it, but didn't really understand what it was about. And even in watching it, it's like, oh, this is different than I thought that it was going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a little blurb about this. This is from the Crip Camp page, web page. And so this is, I'll just read this. In the early 1970s, teenagers with disabilities faced a future shaped by isolation, discrimination, and institutionalization. Camp Jened, a ramshackle camp for the handicapped, a term no longer used, in the Catskills, exploded those confines. Jened was their freewheeling utopia, a place with summertime sports, smoking, and makeout sessions awaiting everyone. And campers experienced liberation and full inclusion as human beings. Their bonds endured as many migrated west to Berkeley, California, a hotbed of activism where friends from Camp Jened realized that disruption, civil disobedience, and political participation could change the future for millions.
Yeah, because when it started, we meet our sort of person who is he's one of the producers, Jim Lebrecht. We meet him, and he is living in the Bay Area. He's a sound designer with Berkeley Repertory Theater. So it was just like, oh, he's here. But I thought that this was going to be about this camp, but it's actually, in many ways, this was my interpretation of it, was like, it sort of goes back to this idea of this is why representation matters. This is why people need to see other people that look like them and can advocate for them, because what this camp did in many ways was almost like gave, and goddamn that Judy, Judy Newman has been fighting, like, my God, but you had no idea what this woman was about to do when you see her at camp. But that's the thing. And she doesn't explicitly say this, but what she implies, I feel, is it was because of this camp. It was because that I was here in this place where I was seen and accepted and felt like, oh, I have a voice, and I have a voice that deserves to be heard, that this group of people were able to go and fight for all the rights that we have now.
Yeah,
and
there was
wow. It's an incredible story.
It's really remarkable. Another one of the campers said something to the effect of, it wasn't until I got here that I could even see what was even possible for me or what I could do. Because so this camp opened in actually 1951. And the time when they are filming this, it's 1971. But, back then, especially in the 50s, but even still in the 70s, children with disabilities were kind of hidden away. They didn't have any of the rights they have now about going to school. And in fact, they were rejected from schools, told they couldn't go to school. This woman, Judy, her mom tried to enroll her in school and they said, well, no, she can't walk. She's a fire hazard. If there's a fire, we can't get her out or whatever. So anyway, they were used to living these very small, isolated lives, just kind of with their parents taking care of them. And then all of a sudden they go to this summer camp up in the Catskills in New York, and everybody there is handicapped or disabled. They called it handicap back then. But the proper term is disabled. So they're like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And they could be themselves and they could talk about what they felt and their hopes and their dreams. And they all realize, yeah, I deserve more. I deserve more out of life.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
It's really, really moving.
It is. And one of the pieces of that I think is so interesting that sort of throughout this entire documentary is the part about relationships, love, sexuality, which is because, who was a real stud at camp? Steve, the producer Steve. He will regale you with some study of what a stud he was at camp.
And what made him such a stud?
I don't know. Camp New Judea every summer. But apparently, I don't know. I really don't know. But he told me stories because we never really went to these summer camps.
No.
We've camped and all that stuff, but we didn't do that kind of traditional, like going away for 2 months at a time. And Steve did it every single year. And that was the thing. There was like one spot by the rock that everyone would make out. You know what I mean? Like everyone would meet there to make out. And that's what the campers are talking about being at this camp and talking about, like, I had my first kiss at this camp. And just the reality of, oh, I can fall in love. And there's someone out here who loves me. I can have sex. I can do all these things. I can build a life. I can, and I think that that's such a, what's special about it is, you get to have, this is a camp. You're having a camp experience. You're making out by the big rock, by the whatever. That's camp,
Yeah. And at a time when a lot of kids were just institutionalized or there wasn't. And I think they talk about this, their parents being very overprotective and keeping them, because they're afraid that they're going to be treated differently and bullied, and they just sort of keep them at home. And they want to protect them. It's an instinct, but that's not what they need. They need to be able to go out into the world and be told, you can live a normal life. And this was the beginning of people with disabilities fighting for being able to live a normal life and integrate into society, which requires the government to mandate that our world be designed and accessible for people who are in wheelchairs, for people who maybe not in a wheelchair but can't walk up a flight of stairs, or need accommodations and public transportation. Everything. When you just kind of one day, go out and look around the world and think, okay, if I was in a wheelchair, how would I navigate this?
Yeah.
Because even now that we do have these laws where, you have to have the sidewalk at the corner has to go down so you can, travel in a wheelchair or whatever, it's still challenging.
Yeah.
It's still difficult. So anyway, they all tell stories about being denied being let into public schools. I think this guy Jim said that they wouldn't let him join the Cub Scouts.
Yep.
because he had spina bifida, and he was in a wheelchair. And another thing I realized, there were a lot of people in this documentary who had polio.
Yes. And that is, I think, I kept thinking about today and where we're at today. And it's so interesting because this whole, a big fight that they were fighting for was this 504. And anybody who has a kid knows, because I went down this road with my son, 504 means accommodations for where like, this is the form that you have to do to get your kid accommodations at school. And just how much people rely on this 504 and where we're at in terms of like, my son needed accommodations because of his anxiety. And, kids need accommodations because of their ADHD or learning issues or whatever it is, and how much that has changed and how schools are very much like, there's so many kids now that they're seeing like, oh my God, yeah, it's not just one kid.
Yeah, because so 504 is a section of it's the Rehabilitation Act of 1972, which says that if you accept money from the federal government, you cannot discriminate against people with disabilities, and you have to give them accommodations. And at first, Nixon vetoed it because it was too expensive. And the government dragged their feet for years and years on this, saying, oh, it's going to cost too much to do all this, and it's only benefiting a very few people. And they really made these disabled activists fight for this. I mean, they had to fight like hell for this. And so it was finally passed. And so that's why it's like 504 for short. And so the Department of Rehabilitation, this is the law of the land starting in 1973. They were kind of Nixon was really shamed into signing it. But this is many years even before the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. That came much later in 1990. So while it was the beginning of this movement and it passed, but then they didn't enforce it. The government wasn't enforcing it. Things weren't changing.
Yeah.
Accessibility for people was not changing for a very, very long time. So anyway, we'll get into that more later. But in the beginning, we meet the different people who met at this camp in the 70s, and then later all kind of came back together to fight for disability rights.
Yeah. So we meet Jim, who is one of the producers and and then the other person that we meet is Judy, who I mentioned, Human, who she was a camp. We meet her because she was a camp counselor, but I guess she also went to the camp as well, and she had polio. And she was the one who had to be homeschooled until she was about 8 or 9. And she said finally then she could go to school, and their classes were in the basement. And, but what she talked about was that she even felt so sidelined that, she was like, people just didn't want to hear from us. People didn't want to hear that they, and when they talked about, at this camp, because the camp is up near Woodstock, up in the Catskills of New York. And they talked about like the counselors would take the kids into the town, on the weekends to get ice cream and do stuff. And there was this, the kids couldn't go into the ice cream shop because it wasn't set up for them. But there was also this feeling in the town of, like, I don't want to see that.
We don't want to see you. Yeah.
And I wrote this down. One of the people said, we already feel small enough. We already feel small enough that people are, these looks, that, the feeling that we have of having to, and you have to really think about that, of how much just to fight to have the right to take a bus, and how, and that's the thrust of really what Judy was talking about, and what she's advocating for is like, what this camp did for the kids was it made them feel for the first time like, no, we're not small, and there's not just one of us, there's many of us.
Yeah, and together. One thing she said was that when they did finally let her go to school, like you said, they were segregated. They were put in the basement. And I have to say, I went to junior high and high school in the 80s, and special ed was segregated.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
there was
it
the
was.
special ed wing of the building over here in this room and this and that. And, looking back, it was a very small number of kids who were even in the special ed program. And statistically, I feel like there should have been more.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is what happens is that a lot of these kids, they just never even make it to school. Their parents either keep them at home or hide them, or there's, because there's just like this shame and this,
Mm-hmm.
like everything is so difficult. I just feel like a lot of people with disabilities just slip through the cracks
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of self-isolate, because
Yes.
even if there is a program, a special ed program for you to go to, it's still difficult.
Mm-hmm.
You're still, you're treated like a second-class citizen. I'm sure they were made fun of. I'm sure kids in my school, made fun of them when they saw them. And,
Mm-hmm.
It's embarrassing and the whole thing. And so it's like, even if you have a program, it's like, okay, there's still so many barriers to being able to live a normal life. That's why when you go to camp, everyone's disabled.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, yeah, I can be sexual. I can, do these things because there's no more inhibitions or shame or anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, just, I mean, that whole idea of the segregation.
Yeah. No.
Remember.
Yeah. No, there's I had a lot of thoughts when you were talking, but yeah, it is. It is. Because I'm trying to think about, I was in middle school in the 80s and then high school and then college was more the 90s for me. But I'm trying to think about how it was, but I do feel like there were certain classes and you just people that you maybe randomly saw wandering around, but that was it. There was no integration, no. And so what that did was it created even more of these barriers, even more of these like us versus them kind of feeling and being, to do that. Because we know that once people see someone, understand them, empathize with them, can connect with them, that we see them differently. We
see them as human.
We see them as human. And so that was the other part of it too, was because they weren't in mainstream school, we never got to see them, we never got to hang out or talk or, meet someone. And I thought was so interesting was Jim was saying that his father told him, Jim, you need to be really outgoing. You need to go and introduce yourself to other people and make friends because no one's going to come up to you.
Yeah.
And I think that is so
sad, but
interesting.
True.
And it's sad, but it's very, very true. It is very, very true that in some ways it was like, and he talked about this, Jim talked about this because he was in the situation where he was in mainstream school. And so he didn't have, he said, none of my friends had disabilities. So who do you relate to? Who do you connect with if, you are the only one? And that's the other part of it too, is this idea of what they're talking about of like always being found out. Jim talks about that he wore diapers. And there was always this fear of people finding out. And many of the campers said that they didn't realize how much they had been holding in until they got to this camp, until they, were there. So yes.
Yeah. So when Jim got to camp, he was cool. Like he was a good looking kid. He was like hanging out with all these other guys. They're jamming, playing the Grateful Dead. Yeah, he meets Nancy. She becomes his first girlfriend. They're making out.
Yeah, their 1 week anniversary was
there was so much hooking up that there was a case of crabs that got control. Like crabs spread through the whole camp, and they had to separate the boys and the girls for like a week to get rid of the crabs. And there was a lot.
And that really disrupted Nancy and Jim's first week anniversary. They could not celebrate together at all. But something else that was said during this time, because at this camp, they started to have these kind of rap sessions, talking about their feelings, talking about how things are. And one of the things, she had cerebral palsy. And it was very interesting. She was talking. It was very hard to understand her. But this other guy with cerebral palsy knew exactly what she was saying.
He could translate.
He could translate it. And he's like, no, what Nancy was, I think.
Yeah, her name
was Nancy too.
Yeah.
He's saying what Nancy's saying is that she never gets to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
That she doesn't never gets to be alone, think alone, and that she's denied the right to privacy because of this disability and because of the help that she needs. She's been denied the right to privacy, and how critical and important that is. And I think about some of the things like what must be so hard about being in prison, is the no privacy. How, with parents and teenagers, teenagers they need their privacy, how important that is and how important it's privacy. We all need privacy.
Yeah.
We all have the right to have privacy, but just how that is and how much that impacts her and how that feels. And again, these conversations are important, not because I think a lot of times people feel like, then I have to do something. It's like, no, you just need to hear that this is Nancy's experience. Like, yeah, she's always going to need some level of help, but empathize. See, get that this is Nancy. This is what Nancy's going through every single day, is that she never gets privacy.
And I thought it was remarkable how they treated her, because literally I couldn't understand anything that she said, but they would. When she wanted to talk, everyone would stop and be quiet and listen to her talk, whether they could understand it or not, until she was finished. And then they would do something to try to acknowledge what she was trying to convey. And this other guy, I forget his name. He would use.
Oh yeah. I think because he was a real character, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve Hoffman.
And just, I also thought it was remarkable. Okay. This is 1971. And who had the foresight to film all of this? Because you have to, in 1971, to film something, you had to have like one of those big, huge, like news camera or camcorder type things. They were very expensive. I'm not quite sure who decided to film it or why they were filming it. And but they did. And I was like, wow, this footage is really amazing that they caught this footage.
Well, you saw them with that microphone, that big giant microphone, like passing that around. But yeah, I was wondering that too. At first I was like, oh, is this Jim's project? I thought, oh, this is Jim's project, but it was a little unclear if that was Jim's project. I get
Jim was just a kid. He was
I know. I was like, is he the one but I couldn't quite understand it. I get the sense, because we see it when they roll the credits, they do mention this, this organization from the 70s, and it seemed like from 1970 to 1972, it must have been some small film company or documentary film, you know what I mean? And they must have gotten some kind of budget, or someone had an idea. And this has been sitting somewhere this whole time. Someone probably thought, eventually I'll do something with all of this footage. Yes. Yeah. So let's see. This is the other thing. There's another woman who we meet named Denise, who had also had cerebral palsy. And I think that is one piece that she doesn't directly say this, but yeah, when Denise is speaking, you have to stop. You really have to focus. You have to hear. You have to really listen. And the reality is, Denise is like, she is putting down a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. And I can hear that feeling of, I have something to say. I have a voice, but because it comes out this way, it's never being heard.
Right.
People aren't willing to listen to it.
Right. These are all intelligent people. They don't have brain damage. You know what I mean? They all are very smart. It's just hard for a lot of them. It's hard to get their words out.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to communicate. And that's the thing. When people get around someone like that, I think that the kind of the instinct is to shut down. It's too hard. Oh, this is too hard. It's too hard to listen. It's too hard to be patient.
Yeah.
And so, they're going through, because life moves so fast. When you're out, you're trying to do this and people don't stop and take the time to listen to you and be really patient and
Well, yeah. And especially the world that we live in today, there's just so many voices. There's so many voices coming at you. And that was one thing that they talked, they did indicate this, where they talked about how, we've gotten this real conditioning from movies and television about how to view people with disabilities. They were either objects of fear, of pity, or of loathing. And I was like, you don't even make that connection. Like, oh, that's right. Yeah, that is. And that people have been conditioned. And so we see this news report from like 1972 where they're trying to introduce the Disabilities Act. And the comparison that they make is about animals. Like, well, animals, when somebody can't keep up with the pack, animals, it's just a little bit like, whoa. Geez, but that was this mentality for a long time of the survival of the fittest. Like, well, you're not fit enough. You can't survive. Sorry, and hey, life moves fast. Just, you got to keep along, and taking this attitude of this is your fault, which is kind of what we do with a lot of this stuff. Like there's like putting it back on the person. Right. Well, you figure this out. You solve this.
Well, especially ridiculous when a lot of this is the result of polio or cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy a lot of times comes about because of a traumatic birth, being deprived of oxygen during birth. And this is stuff this is just the circumstance. Yeah. These things had just happened. Like nobody brought any of this on themselves. I mean, for people to suggest that is absolutely just ludicrous, but what do I know? I mean,
yeah. Well, it's just sort of, it's always when we watch these documentaries to just hear some of the news reports of the 70s are like, okay, kind of interesting.
Thing about how, this is too hard. That's kind of the oh my God, we're going to have to like upgrade every single public transportation and every building and every school, every hospital. Oh no, that's too much.
And the attitude,
it's too expensive.
Yeah. Well, and they're taking this attitude of like a very small group of people. And it's a little bit like, well, hold on, back up. Because I don't even feel like they were taking into consideration, elderly people are in wheelchairs.
Right.
There are a lot of people who have broken legs are in wheelchairs. Yeah. There's lots of times that people are in wheelchairs that need accommodations that are just about that phase of their lives,
What about a baby stroller?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. How many times have we had to lug a baby stroller up some stairs, because there's no ramp or, it's at least 2 or more points in everybody's life. They're going to need physical accommodations.
Yeah. Well, so this got Judy, she just jumped right in. So Judy started this Disabled in Action group, and she started, going out there, and she brought a suit to the Board of Education in New York, where she talked about like, listen, she references the Brown versus the Board of Education of like, hello, we are sick of being excluded. We're sick of being dismissed and excluded. We're going to start fighting for our rights. And this is when we see the Geraldo Rivera. And I have some vague recognition. Like, I feel like I've seen scenes from this documentary before of this. Geraldo Rivera did a special news report that was on the nightly news.
ABC News or something.
About Willowbrook, which is this institution. So
it's a New York State hospital.
And we see scenes from this place where there is only one attendant for 50 kids. And we see are children naked or partially clothed that, sitting in their own filth by themselves on the floor, the cold
they're emaciated.
Yeah. And the other thing is because many of the children could not feed themselves and they didn't have enough attendance, they basically would shovel food into the kid's mouth for 3 minutes and then had to move to the next kid. And so the kids were malnourished. And Jim tells a story of one of the kids from Willowbrook came to the camp. And he said this guy would just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until he threw up because he was so starved. Yeah. And finally, I mean, not even that alone, but this woke up for a lot of people. A lot of people saw that. And I have this vague recollection, of these things. I think I'm thinking more of like all of the 2020 reports on those Romanian adoption, orphanages. But it's the same thing of children not being cared for, not being touched, not getting the needs and the care that they need.
And during this time, if you had a child who, had a significant disability, the doctors would tell the parents, just put them in an institution. They're never going to have a normal life. They're never going to be able to do this or that. And that was just how it was done. And it's just part of the culture.
Psych Legal Pop will be back after these messages.
This message comes from Jackson. Taxes aren't something you can only think about once a year. With investments, planning for tax day is year-round. Fortunately, Jackson offers tax-efficient products. Visit jackson.com for more information on how our products can make your tax bill a little bit less painful. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.
Chicago, 2011. A cop is murdered. Police and prosecutors swear they have the trigger man. He swears he didn't do it. How far will each side go to prove they're right?
Like it's just one bombshell after another, where you're like, what?
The story of a PlayStation, a brain-eating amoeba, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Off Duty, out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Because that's the other part of it is when you think about someone like Judy who's going to school, right? If we think about her and Judy's mother. So first, Judy couldn't go to school. So her mother needed to homeschool her essentially and teach her. And I don't know if Judy has siblings or not, but that's the thing is if you think about these parents and how difficult all of this is, it's like not everyone has the luxury of being able to homeschool their kid. And then, okay, now you've got to get Judy to school. Okay, but there's no public transportation for her. So you're going to have to drive her. So can you really drive her? You know what I mean? It's like, you have to think about the situation that parents were in, where if you want to give your kid, if you want them to, go out and be in the world, how much that would impact you because there's not these accommodations. Or the other side where you're like, okay, I need to make money. I need to live. My family needs to eat. So you're like, okay, institution. All right.
I feel like Judy came from kind of a not wealthy, but at least well-off family.
Yeah. I mean, Judy was lucky because she had parents that could do that. I mean, that's the other part of it. If you do not have parents that could financially or emotionally or physically provide all of this for you, this is why you would end up in this institution. And one thing that they talked a little bit about parents and the feeling is, and I'm sorry, I'm just, people do, I think that when your child is not, following the rules or in the quote unquote norm, the world does make parents feel like there's something that you did wrong. Yeah. That there is. My son has a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. And I have been kicking myself, blaming myself for I don't know how long for something did I do something? Did something happen here? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? All of these things that are just kind of I just have to accept it. But I do feel judged. Maybe I'm judging myself harshly, but I do when I'm bebopping in the world and people are like, oh, what happened to your kid? He used to be at the school with us. And I have to tell them what's been going on and what's happened. You do feel very judged by the world, as if I'm a shitty parent. Yeah. And I think that was for a lot of parents feeling that's how I should feel.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anywho. But Judy said, Judy said no. Judy said civil rights were happening all around us and we needed to be included. And this was the Rehabilitation Act of 1972. And this was the section of 504. We just mentioned that. And so it did become a law, but I guess, nothing happened.
Yeah, they weren't forcing it.
And so no one was enforcing it. And during this time, all of these campers they're getting older, they're going to college, they're graduating. And Jim graduated from high school. He went to University of San Diego, UC San Diego, because he wanted to do sound for the Grateful Dead, and that was his dream. And all of these other camp people are in Berkeley. Judy went out there. Nancy went out there, Jim's old girlfriend. They all moved to Berkeley. And essentially, did they start the Center for Independent Living?
No.
Or was this already an organization?
It was already.
Okay.
Yeah. So Berkeley has always been like kind of the disability rights capital of the country. And there was this guy named Ed Roberts, and he started this Center for Independent Living. And there's now that new building that's by the Ashby BART station, and it's called the Ed Roberts.
Oh, okay.
Center for, because there have been different locations, but as it's grown, they now have this really nice big center that's named after him.
It's crazy seeing all those old video things of Berkeley. I kept trying to look to see if I could pick, but I saw Ashby Avenue.
Yeah, I saw them on Telegraph Avenue. Yeah. So this is where it all started. And so, Nancy came out to start working for the Center for Independent Living, and then all of her friends from camp followed. And a lot of them were just living in the Bay Area, because this is it's a progressive, tolerant place. And so,
and for many of them, it was sort of like rediscovering. I mean, sort of this talking about going to Halloween parties and dressing up and just what this was. And it was like this awakening it was like the second awakening for them.
So then we get the Carter administration. And again, nothing is being done to enforce this Section 504. And so Carter's, he was like the head of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, this guy, Joseph Califano. And he really didn't give a shit.
No.
He wasn't doing anything to enforce this law. And these schools, universities, hospitals, whatever, they did not want to spend money to make their institutions accessible. And no one was enforcing it, so they weren't doing it. Nothing was happening. And so Judy organized with all of her friends. She organized, and they went to the San Francisco, the headquarters of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. And they took over the office there. And they just got people to just go there and they just refused to leave. And they had all kinds of people, trying to help them. But of course, like the feds, this is a federal building. So they cut off the water, they cut off the phones. So these people, they're trying to survive inside this building, and they have nothing but all these civil rights groups and like the union leaders, Glide Memorial Church,
the
Black Panthers did a lot, fed them, provided them food every day. All these activist groups came in to support them. And then the timing, and then they were meeting, there was two congressmen, George Miller and Philip Burton, who I think one's from the East Bay. I think George Miller's from the East Bay and Burton might be from San Francisco. But anyway, they were congressmen at the time, and they held a hearing on, what was happening, and that the activists had drawn attention to. And so this Califano guy, he doesn't even show up. He sends some other guy who basically gives a laundry list of excuses as to why they can't enforce this law. And he even brings up separate but equal. He even says that. And then he tried to leave the room and just be like, okay, I did my speech. I'm going to go over here. And the congressman went and said, no. You come back in here and you listen to these people. And, Judy dressed this guy down.
Yes, Judy was tired. She had been on that floor
for 20 days or something.
She is exhausted. And also the other thing you have to recognize, which they were pointing out in the documentary, is for us to sleep on the floor for 20 days,
right,
would suck.
These are people.
Imagine having a disability where you have to be turned, right?
She's talking about, yes.
Where you do need you need a certain kind of bed. You need certain things. I don't need a certain kind of bed. But even that, but how much this meant to them, how important this was that they were willing to do this.
Yeah, they were fighting for their basic right to exist.
Yep.
To be able to go out into the world and move about and go to work and go to school.
What was one of the things, did Judy say this? She says, the world wants us dead, but I'm going to survive and push back.
Yeah, sounds like.
I don't know who, it sounds like Judy. Judy wasn't going to put up with anything.
So in the middle of all this, they ended up staying there for like 24 days. But I believe in the middle of it, some people paid, they got someone to pay for Judy and a contingency of people to go to Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one reporter, I remember this guy, Evan White from ABC Local News. He was like the only news person in the Bay Area covering it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he went with them to Washington, D.C., and he got this coverage on all of the ABC affiliates, like all over the country. And when they went to D.C., again, because there's no access to transportation, the machinists union in D.C. got a big truck where they could, this is so like humiliating. They loaded all the people in their wheelchairs onto the truck, like a moving truck, closed up the truck and transported them all around DC where they needed to. It was literally the only way that they could get transportation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's how dramatic it was.
Mm-hmm.
So the first place they went when they got there was to Califano's house.
Yeah. This guy is I could not believe what a wussy this guy is. I could not believe, and I've met some of these people. All these, especially men who talk tough and talk about all this stuff, but when it really comes down to it, too scared to face these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the police really couldn't arrest them because they weren't doing it. They weren't a threat. They were these people in wheelchairs just out in front of this guy's house. And then they spend the night out there, outside in the street. And then in the morning, he slips out the back door.
What it was. I was just like, oh, you don't even have the guts to walk outside. This is the other thing too. Califano, if you feel so strongly about this, that you don't want, that you are, you feel so strongly that you don't have the funds, you don't want to face this, then at least walk outside and talk to the people. Mm-hmm. But he knows this is bad. He knows. Do you know what I mean? No one runs out the back unless they know what they're doing is wrong.
Well, and also I was a little disappointed to hear this part was that Jimmy Carter also, the heat was on him. This is his secretary, or, cabinet department member, whatever. He slips out the back door at church that Sunday because they're in town and they're, showing up and there's all this attention on it. And he didn't want to deal with it either. And you know what? Why didn't he tell Califano, that's his boss.
Yeah.
He should tell him, do that. What are you doing?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yes. Jimmy Carter,
yeah.
Well, and so eventually, though, Califano signed.
Yeah, he capitulated after, and this is 24 days in, because while Judy is in Washington, D.C. with a group, there's the whole group, they're still in San Francisco, still occupying this building, sleeping on the floor. And after 24 days, they got to leave because, they finally, got Califano to sign off on this.
Yeah. So, I don't know who said this, but it was like the 504 told me I had value. And so Jim graduates from college. He's like, he can go up to the Bay Area where he wants to be with his friends. And he gets this job as a sound designer at Berkeley Rep. And he talks about what it was like, because when he first got the job, it was not wheelchair accessible. But they then moved buildings that they had to, when they got a new space, they had to, because of these laws, they had to make it accessible.
Yeah, he had to like climb up these stairs, get out of his wheelchair, climb up these, it was very strange, like it was almost like a ladder.
Yeah, it's very
He had
weird.
to do this multiple times a day. And I was like, God.
Yeah. Well, you know what Judy said? She said, I'm sick of this. I don't want to sit around and just be grateful for having accessible bathrooms. Judy's gonna keep fighting. So, and then I guess, did Reagan try to repeal the laws? But he wasn't successful, or?
Yeah, he was speaking. So they show it's 1980 and he's speaking about it. Yeah, basically saying that, it's too much. It's this is too expensive. It's too much. It's too hard. Because at this time, they're trying to fight for what eventually will become the Americans with Disabilities Act 10 years later. But yeah, no, Reagan was not interested in this. So, but because the 504 only applied to federal agencies, so that means private businesses were exempt. You could still be fired for having a disability.
Yeah,
it's a very limited scope, right? So. So all through the 80s, they kept fighting. 1990, there was a huge protest where they show all these people who were in wheelchairs, got out of their wheelchairs and crawled up the steps of the Capitol. Some of them are just in agony, but they're like, I'm going to do this if it kills me. And that was a huge protest. And Judy testified before Congress. And I think Ted Kennedy they showed him. He was pretty instrumental in getting this passed through Congress. And then President Bush signed it.
Yeah. And there was another congressman who, I guess, his brother was deaf. And so he signed.
Tom Harkin.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, this is representation matters. Like, this is why you need people to, to see each other. And it's unfortunate, but I mean, obviously, the Kennedys are who was it that had disabilities in their family? The Kennedys are also very active.
The one sister who, they gave her a lobotomy.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I thought that, doesn't Maria Shriver have all of these?
Oh, well, her father started the Special Olympics.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this has been very important to their family and to what. So you've got Kennedy, which is good. You've got someone there, but we need more of these people who have had this direct experience,
right?
To come in and run for office.
Well, yeah,
I don't know why Judy hasn't.
Yeah, I don't know why she ended up working for the State Department.
Yes, that's right.
So, but the what was it? Oh, speaking of Tom Harkin, he had a sibling who was deaf, so he knew sign language. But that's another thing, like disability is such a wide ranging, because this movie focused a lot on people who were in wheelchairs or, confined in that way. But yeah, being blind, being deaf. There was one man who was blind, who was a big character in this. But yeah, there's so many different types of disabilities, and it affects, like you said, everybody has someone in their family, at least somebody who has some kind of a disability in some way, shape, or form. This is not some rare thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and now we're starting to see, we're finally categorizing mental health issues as disabilities, because it is a disability.
Because you need accommodations.
And here's another one. We meet this woman, Holly, is it Holly Lynn? She was a girl from Texas, and she talks about how she was 22 years old. She just graduated from college, and a truck ran her off the road, and she became a paraplegic. And she said, I had to, and this is the other thing too, people, like, you may need a wheelchair someday.
Right.
And you cannot predict that. Anything can happen. So I love all these people that were like, I don't know if there's enough people for this. I mean, so, but she talks about that too. She actually went to Miss Magazine and like pitched an article idea. And I guess she covered for Miss Magazine this movement of everything that's happening. But she talks about how she had to accept herself. She had to go through a lot and accept herself and see herself. And I think she was the one that, now that I think about it, like she was the one that said, this 504, I now be seen. I'm seen. I'm heard. I'm here. And so that's the other part of it too, is you can go from one place in your life to another very quickly.
Very quickly.
So,
yeah. And they also talked about how, the Vietnam War, so many people came back from Vietnam disabled by the war because, and Iraq is same with all our modern wars now. There's so many more people who come back with these catastrophic injuries because we've gotten really good at saving people. It used to be in war, you either died or you survived.
Yeah. I mean, you lost a limb. That was it. You were gone. There's no way you could live. Yeah.
So now these soldiers come back and they've lost a limb or two. And so now they're disabled for the rest of their life. And I mean, it's a lot of people. It's not just a lot of work for a small number of people, as these politicians were trying to say. So
yeah, it's just such a lame excuse. Like, there's not enough money. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to take so much.
It's too hard.
Like, yeah, this is called your job, right? Like, this is too hard. Can we pick something that's easier? It's like, no, no, you can't. This is life. You don't have, no one's expecting you to get it done in one day. But
you have to start.
You got to start somewhere.
You have to start trying. And I forget who said this, but they said you can pass a law, but the societal attitudes have to change.
Yes.
For people to realize that this is important. And, and again, I keep thinking about, I was really thinking, and watching this movie, I was thinking about all the points in my life of being in school or my daughter being in school or just things we did. I just feel like there weren't as many. I didn't see, and we're here in the Bay Area where, it's the attitudes are positive about this, but on a daily basis and in people that I know in my friend group, I don't know a lot of disabled people, like physically, like obviously we just said there's a lot of different disabilities take a lot of different forms, but in terms of like people in wheelchairs and that type of thing, I'm like, I feel like I should know more people who are dealing with this. But does that sound weird? I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I'm trying to think about my life.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
No.
I had this one experience in college that has always haunted me. So, I was in a sorority, and one year, I think I was like a junior, going into my junior year, and it was sorority rush. And it was the first time everyone was talking about how, for the first time, a girl who was in a wheelchair was going through a rush. Like this had never come up before.
Yeah, I was going to say, no one that did not, when I was in a sorority, no one was in a wheelchair.
So this girl was going through a rush, and, she was a delightful girl, and she, there's different rounds, and, you cut people. Anyway, she made it up until the final cut. And so we had our meeting that night where we had to do our final cuts for the next day. And so normally, the officers in the sorority would conduct this. But that night, two women from the corporation board, which is like, the alumni who run the house and are in charge of all the finances and all that. And they're supposed to be like advisors, but they just seem like old ladies. They're probably like 55. They're probably my age, but they seemed so old or whatever. But anyway, they came in and they gave us this talk where, and it was very clear that they did not want us to invite this girl to join our sorority.
Wow.
And they didn't come out and say it directly, but they were saying, well, because there was a requirement you had to live in the sorority house for at least a year. And so they were like, well, because all the bedrooms were upstairs. And there actually was a guest room downstairs. I don't know why she couldn't have lived there. But they were saying, well, if she lives in the house, it's just going to be too hard. And where is she going to live? And, we're going to have to make all these accommodations and blah. They were going on and on and on. And it was just like, oh my God, like, I can't believe this is happening. And it was awful. And they just kept saying, well, think about how, it's going to be so difficult, blah, 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 blah. And I think they even did say something about a fire, like what happens if there's a fire? And it's like, well, someone will go in and get her. What do you mean what's going to happen if there's a fire? I mean, it was ridiculous. Then they sort of opened it up for discussion.
Oh, God.
And there was this one girl who she really wanted to run. I think she wanted to run for president of the sorority. She really fancied herself, and she made it very clear that she was going to, run for president. So she stood up and she said, well, as a future leader in this house, I just have to say that handicapped people make me very nervous.
Oy vey.
Yeah. And by this point, like, people are very upset and very pissed off.
And this is 1980?
This is like 1989.
89. Okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know, people said what they were going to say. And then we had a vote. And it was like, you put your heads down.
Yeah. These votes were always secret.
Yep. And people were crying. I think I was crying because I was like, I can't believe this. This is the fucking cruelest thing I think I've ever experienced. And, I voted for her to be in the House, but it wasn't enough. The vote was, the majority was no.
Yeah.
I was disgusted.
Well, listen, there were girls in my sorority that wouldn't want somebody that was overweight to be president. Like whoever represented president or vice president, you had to be perfect looking like that because you represented, and God forbid, someone with a normal looking body, or a normal looking face, or, just normal looking in general was in charge. I mean, and it was never anything official, but it was, it was known. It was known that image mattered a lot. Wow.
Yeah, it was awful. It was an awful experience, and I'll never forget it. It was just...
Those people that have those jobs, those officer people, like I remember we had a couple too in our sorority. They kind of, I don't want to make a generalization, but they were just like these women who, by the time you leave college, you're kind of done with the sorority life. And so these are people who like loved it so much that they stayed in it and never left. And you're spending your weekends and whatever.
The advisors.
The advisors hanging out with 19, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. I mean, the sorority life, it has a shelf life. It really does. So you do always have to wonder about someone who wants to still like be so active in it 20 years later after graduating. It's like, oof.
Yeah, they were always just kind of lecturing us about...
It was a lot of that stuff. Yeah. But yeah, but they do mention this about the freedom that camp provided. And I think someone said, the camp, this is where you get the Judy humans of the world. Like, this is where it started. And because Judy was listened to, because Judy was a leader and felt like a leader at this camp, this is what gave her the push or whatever it is. I'm not inside Judy's head, but like, that's the sense I get, is that this is what gave her the impetus to do everything that she's done in each step of the way. And so this is how these things happen, is when we have representation and when you have groups. And I think that there is this whole idea of, I usually hear this from men about women's groups of like, why can't it be, why can't we all be together? And it's like, what people, what we want? We want a seat at the table. We want to be together. And sometimes we want to be sometimes we just want to be with ourselves. We
have the right to do that.
And people have the right to do that. And And both are true. There are times in our lives where we need to all be together. And there's times in our lives when we need to be with people that can relate to us and understand us. So it's like, but people get so worked up about this stuff. It drives me crazy. Anywho, but yeah, I had no idea this Judy really did a lot. She's a powerhouse of a woman.
Yeah. And like I said, she did go on to work at the State Department as like an advisor regarding disabilities in the State Department or something. And then in the end, they kind of have this reunion on the property. The camp closed down they had financial problems in 1977. And so it was like Jim, Judy, what's the woman's name who they're married, the husband?
Denise, and I forgot her husband's name.
Neil. Yeah.
Neil. Yeah.
And the guy who was the counselor who was from Alabama.
Yes. Lionel.
Yeah.
Lionel. And he was very interesting too, because he said he was from Alabama and he saw a sign that said camp, summer jobs, camp in New York. And he was like, oh, I want to go. And getting there, it was like, oh, he related to the people, people. He's like, I had to learn very early on how to be a Black man in the South, don't look a white man in the eye. Don't do this. Don't do that. It was really fascinating, fascinating to hear what his experiences were. But he came back too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But many of the campers, I was surprised to see how many campers had passed away.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't know. If you have cerebral palsy, does that mean that you're going to live a shorter life?
I think I would venture to guess that people who have severe disabilities probably have a shorter lifespan. You have complications from.
Yeah, I guess so. From some medical issue.
Yeah. A lot of them did die pretty young.
Yeah. Many of them, many in their 40s, 50s. But even Nancy, Jim's first girlfriend at camp, she passed away, in the 80s. So that was like very surprising to see how young she was. One piece of it is we meet Neil and Denise are together and they live together they're in Oakland, Jim's local. And they talk about that Jim, was married and he talks about like this life that he's leading. I never thought I could have all of these things and I have this dream job and I'm married. And it was interesting because Denise tells the story of she had an affair with the bus driver.
I love this story.
So she goes off to college. She comes back from college. She's like, I needed to do something different and I needed to step outside of myself. So she she started working at a nonprofit center, a disabilities nonprofit center. And she was like, I didn't want to die a virgin. and I had an affair with the bus driver. So she starts having this terrible abdominal pain. And so the doctors rush in and they think her appendix was bursting. So they remove her appendix, which was completely healthy. And then they gave her a pelvic exam and learned that she had gonorrhea. But what she talked about was she said nobody would when she had stomach pain, that's exactly where they went to was the appendix or something like that. It couldn't be anything sexual. At first I thought, was she pregnant? Like, what else is going on here? But they never thought it had anything to do with that. And so that's what prompted Denise to go and get go back and get a master's in human sexuality. And I will tell you that when I was getting licensed, we had to take, you didn't do it in grad school, but you had to do it outside of grad school. We had to take human sexuality. And part of human sexuality was we watched this movie. And the guy who was running the class, he said, listen, this is very important. We need to talk about all this. He's like, but this is very graphic and I'm just forewarning you. And it was very graphic, but it was very, very eye-opening because I think the other part that people don't get is beyond like having a girlfriend and all of this kind of stuff is I think that people see people with disabilities and don't think if maybe they can't have sex per se, that nothing else can happen in their life. Like there's nothing sexual. And in this documentary that we watched, it was very much about people with disabilities and their sex lives, basically, and sort of what they're doing. And it really did, it kind of opened up my mind to, you know, how we think about sex and sexuality in our culture, how we really always focus on like the act itself. Like this is like, this means sex. And, you know, if it's not this one thing, then, you know, you're not really intimate with this person or you're not really having sex, but they show, I mean,
yeah. Well, and she had a child, right?
They have a kid.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are people with disabilities where sexually they can't feel anything below their waist, right? But you feel everything from above the waist. You know, the top part of you feels things, and that people need touch and people need that kind of connection, and that is, it releases the same oxytocin and the same everything that sex will. But it was very, very interesting and very eye-opening for me, because I think that, again, it comes back to what Judy was saying in the beginning, which is people just don't want to see us. People just don't want to know, and they don't want to see us. And what was fascinating about this documentary was like, no, you're going to see us. Here you go. You know, here we are. Not going anywhere. Yeah, absolutely. So it was very interesting. Yeah. Excellent movie. Excellent documentary. Thank you, Obamas. Yeah. You notice that Lionel was wearing his Obama hat. Oh, I missed that. I mean, it came out, I don't know when they filmed it, but I mean, I think this, you know, it was, if it came out in 2020, I think Obama was already, you know, he was out of office, obviously. But this guy, Lionel, was wearing Obama 2008. I thought that was funny. Anywho. Right, well, highly recommend. Yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate it. If you want more content from us, of course, we have our Sister Wives coverage on Mondays. We are here for documentaries on Thursdays. And we also have a Patreon that you can get extra content on there. We do weekly bonus episodes and other things. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and give us a rating, 5-star rating. That would be nice. And I think we're still on TikTok. I don't know. I accidentally deleted TikTok, so I may never be on TikTok again. At Psych Legal Pop. But Psych Legal Pop still. Psych Legal Pop is, Tess accidentally deleted the app. She thought it was just a done deal. Like, yes. It was over. I'm out. And now it's back. Now I'm old and I got confused. So, well, if you don't have TikTok anymore, we're on Facebook too. So, you know. No, Instagram. Oh, and Facebook. That's right. Yeah. That's right. All of them. Yes. Instagram. So there you go. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.
This message comes from Jackson. Taxes aren't something you can only think about once a year. With investments, planning for tax day is year-round. Fortunately, Jackson offers tax-efficient products. Visit jackson.com for more information on how our products can make your tax bill a little bit less painful. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.